Hi, everyone. I am so delighted to be here with my new friend, Maribel Ramirez. And I sort of came upon Maribel's work on Instagram and was taken with her live video or her Instagram lives and just the deep kind of wisdom coming from Maribel in through her posts. So like meeting her in person is even better. I mean, in person live here. But what I was drawn to in Maribel's work is her connection to ancient knowledge and story and land. And yeah, so Maribel, maybe you can tell us more about you. So you welcome.
Thank you, Tracy. I am so grateful to be your new friend and to have you as my new friend. um, I yeah, and I really welcome the opportunity to be in the space and connecting with all of you. Um, it's a new experience for me to be doing a Facebook Live. So really thrilled to be here. So a little bit about me. I was a body worker for over 15 years and a yoga teacher. And I've also been walking a plant medicine path for over 12 years. And that, and also Buddhism has been in there as well, and that has led me into a career in mental health. So I'm a mental health therapist right now, and I've been working in for the past few years, I've been working in systems of care, and have really come to realize that wellness is and the lack of it is deeply rooted in the systems that we're partaking in, that we're embedded in, that we're a part of. So looking at capitalism, looking at colonialism, looking at patriarchy and how those systems have influenced our wellness. So a lot of the time I realize that clients are coming in for treatment and we diagnose them and we put them in some box where there's something wrong with the client, and really we're not looking at the waters that they're swimming in,
Yes.
that are contributing to this disease in the individual and in the culture in general. So with that in mind, I launched into my own practice and endeavors through an organization called Liberation Pathways. So in Liberation Pathways, we're looking at pathways of healing that are not necessarily based on the conventional structures. So looking at all the different pathways that could lead us to a remembrance of indigeneity, belonging
Mhm.
to land, belonging to place, and looking at the ways that these structures, these systems that we're a part of, contribute to disease, right? And looking at the pathways that are going to bring us back into reconnection and healing. And so, with that said, I connected with Tracy over story.
Yeah. And I mean, everything you've just said, I'm just feeling all like goosebumps and that path, I think part of I have those some of the same practices, the yoga and the meditation and medicine and so that remembrance is what those practices are, but it really is needs to happen on a bigger, like culturally, we need to remember and yeah, breaking down those systems which have just kept humans
Yes.
bound for too long. And so we connected over story. So let's talk about how story can foster that remembrance.
Yes, absolutely. So I find story to be one of those pathways that are incredibly connective and incredibly healing, in that, as a species, we're a species of of
Mhm.
storytellers, right? So if we look at, indigenous cultures, and we don't even have to go too far back, if we look at, when we lived in village, when we lived together, so often people would get together around the fire and share story, right? And connect with, with the stories of that culture, and or connect with personal stories. And the cool thing about stories is that there is something in every story that we can relate to.
Mm,
When we hear somebody's story, automatically we're pulled into our common humanity, right? Whether
right.
we've experienced that thing or not, right? We automatically get into that place where we're kind of like, oh, well, what would that be like? What would it be like to be lost in the forest? I've been
Hmm.
lost before, right? And
Hmm.
so, it pulls us into that human experience. And as a culture, we've lost that,
Yeah.
right? So you can say, well, we've got television, but the things we're watching, right? We're watching things happen in the moment. We've turned a lot to voyeuristic kind of TV shows where we're looking into an episode of somebody's life, and we've strayed away from the concept of story, right? The concept of, like, here's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and it's coming through a human being and into my imagination and into my heart.
Mm,
Right?
yeah, that's so beautiful. As you're saying that, I'm remembering, working with the storyteller, um, Naomi. Anyway, a friend of mine, and watching my kids, like we did this storytelling workshop and had an evening of storytelling, and watching my kids watch her and how full body engaged they were in their receptivity,
Oh, that's beautiful.
like so that the the it wasn't a passive listening, it was a really active participation in the story itself. It was
Absolutely.
amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, something similar happens when we read a good book.
Hmm.
Absolutely,
Yes.
where we're just kind of like pulled into this world, right? And we
Hmm.
don't even, but being face to face with one another, or being even if we're not face to face, even if we're in this online setting, and hearing the human voice and hearing the emotion that comes through as we share stories is really powerful, because all the mirror neurons are engaging. uh,
Yes.
our body is responding to the voice and the body of another person, so it's really a powerful experience in many ways.
Yeah, and in terms of writing, as you're saying, that the body, because that's really one thing that I emphasize when I'm working with writers is to make that connection to, even though it's on the page, there's something with voice and I call it embodiment, because the more that you engage the body, your own body, that transmission actually comes and is
Mm,
transferred to the reader.
that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't connected that with writing, but I could definitely
Hmm.
see how that would be powerful to show up into the writing space in that embodied way.
Yeah, because there is a kind of storyteller in the writing. We forget about it sometimes, as we're moving into close third or whatever, but there is a storyteller, and that's important for people to remember. So, one thing with the healing, like we talked a little bit before we hopped on here about your offering of sacred myth, and I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more about the healing power of myth and traditional story and the archetypes and how. Anyway, we'll unpack it as you go. We'll just start there
Yeah,
because it's big, I'm sure.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, so this pathway of sacred myth came in as a download,
Mm,
very, very unexpectedly. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the background on that. And I don't want it to be too lengthy, but I was working on my master's, and I was, doing homework and, kind of just stuck in a room doing homework. And, feeling like I was missing out on life and all the things and just, doing all that, jumping through all those hoops. And um, all of a sudden, I just got this very direct message: stop what you're doing, light a candle, call in ceremony, create a ritual space. And here I am with my laptop open, I don't even know if it was a weeknight, So I closed my laptop, I turned on a candle, and I called in a ceremonial space. I
Mm.
looked at the directions, called in the directions, called in the helpers, and then I sat down and I started writing. And what
Mm.
came through was a myth.
Oh.
And like, where did this come from? And so a few months later, my birthday was coming up. And I called some friends and I'm like, hey, do you want to do something, different for my birthday? And so we did it again. We got together, just a small group of us, and around the fireplace, and called in ceremony, called in the ritual space, did the invocations, and we all sat down to write whatever myth wanted to come through, right? So at
Mm.
this time, we had an intention of coming up with a personal myth, of allowing a personal myth to come through. And the other thing that came through was create a list of myth. At that time, I called them myth ingredients because I didn't have language for it. But basically, it was a list that people could look at that contained places, um, archetypes, themes, so if anybody got stuck, they could go in and look at that list and see if something jumped out at them.
Mm.
Um, then the next time I did it, it was with a very large group of people in a retreat space. And at that point, I had a huge poster board with these myth aspects, right? And so we called in ceremony in that large group, and again, people started writing, and they had the opportunity to get up and throw a seashell on this giant board that had all these myth aspects, themes and elements and people and places, if they got stuck. So wherever the shell landed, they would take that back and use it as a tool, kind of like a divination tool,
Yeah.
get that myth out and unstuck.
So when you talk about personal myth, are they connecting to like an ancient myth and then personalizing it, or how did that work? Like I'm
Yeah.
curious in the.
So for some people, they for people created myths, and they had characters and archetypes, and and then in every myth we can look to that myth to see where that myth speaks to us personally.
Mhm.
Right. So you could take a myth that's already, an established myth, right? Because, and find yourself in that myth in a different place. There's like, these little sticking points that call to you. And from there is the medicine in the myth, right? And
Mhm.
so this is where we dive into the myth process, right? And when we look at myths, and we are able to commune with the myth as medicine.
Would you be willing to share a little bit of your experience and your what myth, at least at one of them that you've connected with, and that the medicine for you, in as much as you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So Michael Mead, I don't know if any of you are
Mm.
familiar with Michael Mead. So after that whole myth experience, where the sacred myth ceremony, yeah, that's what I call it now. The sacred myth ceremony came through. One of my friends said, "Hey, have you heard of Michael Mead?" And I hadn't. And so I started looking for Michael Mead and reading his books, and listening to him and listening to podcasts. And I went um, to a live workshop with him, and I saw what he does in sharing the myth with people. So he plays the drum. He also was a colleague, a friend, a student of Malidoma Somé, who
Mhm.
was an African shaman who passed away last year. And he knows the African drumming, he knows the African songs, and he's not African. He's a Irish descent, amazing medicine man. And so he plays the drums and he kind of like helps people get into that trance, and he says the story as he's playing the drums. And so he says one story that really resonates with me. And and at different times in my life there might be different parts of the story that hook me, you know
Mhm.
depending on where you're at with it, like it's the specific medicine that myth has. And so he has one story. It's a Native American story, and I'm not sure what tribe it might be associated with. um, but I also know that some of these Native American stories are also relevant to different peoples with little
Mhm.
variations, right? So this specific story is about an old woman who sits in a cave, and in the back of a cave, there's a fire, and she has to keep this fire going. That's her job. And while she's keeping that fire going, she is also weaving this tapestry, this cloth made of porcupine quills. So she has to like chew the porcupine quills, and then she has to like weave them in. And there's a black dog with her. And so she's like weaving and weaving and weaving, and her teeth are all just wasted away from all that chewing, right? This is like the tapestry of the world that she's weaving,
Mm.
right? She's keeping the fire of the world alive, and she's weaving this tapestry. And it's hard work,
Yeah.
weaving with porcupine quills, and her hands are raw and her teeth are wasted. But here she keeps weaving and weaving and weaving and weaving. And she's done this for thousands and thousands of years. And at some point, she gets up and she goes back to tend the fire, right? And when she goes back to tend the fire, the dog, a black dog who's there, grabs the string of the quill and runs away with it and
Mm.
undoes the entire tapestry of the world,
Wow.
right? And so the old woman sits back down and she starts to weave again.
Mm.
And that story is a story that at so many levels just resonates with my heart, and at different times. So Michael Mead would have you say, what part of the story stands out for you? What part of the story calls you? Is it the part where she's tending the fire? Is it the part where she starts weaving again? Is it the part where she's chewing on the quills? Is it the part where the dog takes the string and runs away,
Right.
right? And undoes the whole entire thing only to start it again.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of where we're at with that process. And when we write our myths, we kind of break those myths down in that way, like, where is the medicine in this myth, right?
Yeah. Beautiful. Wow. I'm just like thinking about that myth or feeling into it. The
Mm-hmm.
both the protection of the fire, the guardian of the fire, and the weaving. Those both seem like, yeah, very symbolic and very big jobs.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
another thing that myth does is it defines culture.
Hmm.
Right. So if we look at creation stories from around the world, we're going to kind of find um, where that culture stands. So if we look at, for example, the Native American myth of Sky Woman,
Hmm.
Robin Welkimmer shares in the beginning of her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and she mentions this as well in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is, you've got the myth of Sky Woman, and Sky Woman falls from the sky, and she's the first human. But she falls from the sky, and with her, she brings a pouch, and the animals of the world kind of hold her, right? And so the turtle comes up and holds her on her back because at that time the earth is
It's
covered in
water.
water, right?
Yeah.
And so all these animals just try to help her and try to figure out like how to get a little bit of dirt from the bottom of this oceanic earth in order to create land for her to live on. And and in that story we see the symbiosis
Mm-hmm.
and the interconnection, and how the earth is this divine place and magical place where everybody is assisting one another, and what she had brought in her hands were seeds,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
those seeds grew and populated the earth. And then if we look at the Genesis creation story, right, and not knocking anybody's belief systems or religion, but something to look at is, in this creation story, human beings are kicked out of heaven and they come to the earth as a punishment
Mm-hmm.
to toil and to lord over the earth and to plow the earth,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And and to have dominion over the earth,
Dominion over. Yeah.
right? And so in that myth, the idea is to get back to heaven, and you're only here temporarily, so just kind of get by and do what you can, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to like this other sacred view.
Mm-hmm.
And in one myth, the woman is punished. Woman is the cause of
Sh-
evil, right?
She's even born out of a rib.
He's born out of a rib, right? And then you've got in this other story, it was woman that fell out of the sky. It was the
Mm-hmm.
feminine, right? The
Mm-hmm.
divine feminine fell out of the sky and was the first human who gave birth to all of life, right?
Yes.
Well, no, life was already here, but that started planting those seeds, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, so that's really where story is powerful.
Yeah, that's reminding me of a couple of books that I've read recently. One is Thomas King. I don't know if you know him. He's a
No.
Canadian Indigenous writer, and
Mm.
he has a book of his lectures, and I forget what it's all about narrative, and it's sort of that like who gets to tell the story and what is the, and he brings this, every chapter begins with the Sky Woman story.
Oh,
And yeah, and turtles all the way down. He and then he there's one point where he does that comparison between Genesis and, anyway, just in a very similar way to what you've just done there. And it struck me so hard seeing it like that. I thought, oh my gosh, there's this, it's almost like the inaccessibility or exclusionary story, and this very celebratory, inclusive story. And I could just see, you just see then how it ripples out. And so with the personal myth and the reclamation, it's like taking those um, stories, that the ripple out effect of that sacred work that you're doing, Maribel, I think is what I'm saying, is so, and what writers are doing, when we reclaim story, it's like we're we're doing more than just trying to get our stories published. It's like a very deep rewiring, reconnecting, remembering, as you're saying, to those deeper, wiser places within us. So thank you so much for sharing that. And how can people connect with you and your work?
yeah. Well, there's a website and it has an email slash newsletter sign up. And the website is liberationpathways.com.
And I'll put a link in the comments below for people. And also you're on, and let's let people know that you do have a free offering. It's not, you don't have dates yet, but we will keep people posted, called Pathway to Story. Maybe you want to say something about that?
Sure, sure. I'd be happy to. So yeah, there is an Instagram account as well, and that's at Liberation Pathways. And I have a Facebook page, but I'm not very diligent on Facebook.
That's okay. We can only be so many places.
Yes, yes. And so, Pathway a Story is a free event that I have randomly. So basically, in the spirit of liberation, not tying
Mm,
myself to specific dates or specific, and so just once in a while, when inspiration strikes, I will announce a Pathway a Story coming up within the month. And so, Pathway a Story is a free event. Anyone is invited to come. And depending on how many people show up, we might have to have kind of like a lottery to pick who will be sharing story on that evening.
mm,
So the idea is to gather around the primordial fire, the symbolic primordial fire, together
uh,
on an evening to share story time, coming with your tea or your hot cocoa or whatever
I
um,
love it.
juicy beverage you would like to partake in, and going into storytelling together. And what I ask people to do is I ask people to come in with different themes, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
they might want to speak on rebirth, or they might want to, whatever their theme is, that's speaking to their heart. And what we do with those themes is we put those themes into a hat, and people pick from those themes. So it could be that you might pick your own theme, or it could be that you might pick somebody else's theme. And then we share stories based on the themes that people brought in, and in that way we make the event very collective. Kind of
Mm,
like the theme that you want to hear, you're going to hear through someone else's mouth, through someone else's perception, through someone else's view. And in that way, we kind of weave each other together. And it's really beautiful because there's a lot of laughter, there are a lot of tears, and
mm.
definitely a huge sense of interconnection. We go to sleep and just keep thinking, and feeling into the stories that we heard, and how they touched us. And it's really a powerful, sweet way to spend the evening. I call it a really great alternative to Netflix and chill. Nothing wrong with Netflix and chill. I love that.
Yeah, but it
But
is that community
yeah,
feeling that we can always use more of in our worlds. Oh, that sounds really good. And so, well, I'll put links so everyone can find you on Instagram and sign up for your newsletter. And I can't wait for that evening of story.
yes,
I'm gonna endeavor to be at the next one.
I would love that. I would love that. You'll receive an invitation.
Okay, awesome. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Maribel, for being here today.
It's an honor. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to connect with you in this way.